Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Alex Elliott, and I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to On Returning the Self to Nature. As many of us are descendants of settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those who were forcefully brought to this continent, we, CIIS public programs, must recognize and never forget that our university's building in San Francisco occupies traditional, unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. If you're interested in learning more about Native lands, languages, and territories, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. Now let me first introduce our presenters, Leslie Davenport and Jeanine Canty, and then we will get right to the conversation. Jeanine Canty is a professor within the Transformative Studies doctoral program and an instructor for the Climate Psychology Certificate here at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Previously, she was a professor of environmental studies at Naropa University, a Buddhist-inspired institution, and she started her teaching career as a core faculty at Prescott College, an experiential learning institution. A lover of nature, justice, and contemplative practice, her teaching intersects issues of social and ecological justice connected to the process of worldview expansion and positive change. And her research situates in ecopsychology, climate justice, transformative learning, contemplative education, and transpersonal inquiries. She is both editor and a contributor to the books Ecological and Social Healing, Multicultural Women's Voices, and Globalism and Localization, Emergent Approaches to Ecological and Social Crises. Her forthcoming book is Returning the Self to Nature, Undoing Our Collective Narcissism and Healing Our Planet. Leslie Davenport is co-lead of the Climate Psychology Certificate program at CIIS and works internationally as a climate psychology educator and consultant, integrating social science insights into relevant resources for organizations exploring the intersectionality of climate, economics, policy, and social justice. She helped shape the document Mental Health and Our Changing Climate: Impacts, Implications, and Guidance. She is the author of 4 books, including Emotional Resiliency in the Era of Climate Change, a manual for the mental health field, and All the Feelings Under the Sun, written for youth through the APA's Children's Book Division. Leslie is an advisor to the nonprofits Climate Mental Health Network, Integrative Healers Action Network, and One Resilient Earth, and on faculty with the CIIS School of Professional Psychology and Health. And now let me turn it over to Jeanine and Leslie.
Welcome back, everyone. Well, in addition to this rich conversation that we'll have tonight, we know that it's also about integrating experience and taking in information in different ways. So Jeanine, I hope you'd be willing to start us out with a practice from your book. I'm thinking of the one towards the beginning that's called rooting. And if you just
sure.
Sort of gather together.
I would love to. Yeah, and I also want to acknowledge Alex did the land acknowledgement, and I'm coming in from, I live outside in the foothills of Boulder, Colorado. So I do want to acknowledge that I'm on the ancestral lands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute peoples. So yeah, it's probably evening for most of us, but it could be a different time of the day when folks are watching, listening to this. So we'll just root right now. So I would encourage everyone to get into a comfortable either seated position, whether you're on a chair or you can sit on the floor, a cushion, but it's also perfectly fine to stand up if that's what's calling to you in the moment. And just get grounded, and we'll get a bit grounded. And what I will encourage you to do is that you can make your eyes soft, or you could also close your eyes I tend to keep my eyes a little bit open, but anyway is fine. But if you do have your eyes soft, keep them soft without staring at anything or anyone. And you can even close your eyes. And then let your body be heavy. Let your legs, your sit bones, your feet, your arms, everything to relax and to feel supported by the ground below you. I like to make contact with my feet on the ground in some manner. And taking a deep breath, imagine that you have deep roots that form from the base of your sit bones, your seat, that plunge deep into the earth, whether through the carpet or the floor below, through any stories at levels, through the cement, eventually finding rich earth. And allow your belly to be soft and begin taking some really deep breaths that come deep in your belly and start to generate heat. Let your inhales and your exhales be deep, taking in cleansing air. Notice your posture and let your torso be upright. Elongate your neck and slightly tuck your chin. Relax your mouth and your jaw, and you might even want to stretch out your mouth and even stick out your tongue for a moment. Relaxing your face, relax your eyes once more. And then just as you imagine that you have roots plunging below you into the rich earth, imagine that from the crown of your head, you have long branches that are reaching towards the sky that mirror your roots below. And taking those deep breaths, notice if there are any areas of pain or discomfort in your body. And taking a deep breath, send your breath to all of these spaces. And then touch into your heart and notice if there's a dominant emotion that's arising for you. Don't spend too much time thinking about the emotion, just be with it and silently name this emotion, honoring it and really acknowledging that this feeling is just one of many lenses that you're experiencing right now. And breathing, we'll sit in silence for a moment or two. And then gently come back to your surroundings. Yeah, thank you for asking me to share that, Leslie.
So beautiful, so beautiful. Well, it would be great to hear even a little more about your background and especially what led you to write this book that's coming out on narcissism and returning the self to nature.
Yeah. And yeah, it's so hard as, especially I think as we get older to like, oh, what is my background? But I guess in a short snapshot, and I think Alex's intro was great in terms of kind of the academic things. A lot of my kind of stories, my life stories, have intersected around being a person of color in the US. I identify as African American, Black, multicultural. I have a kind of a bricolage of cultural background. So I've always been very aware of social injustice, social justice issues. And at the same time, I've been really always found kind of nourishment, comfort, guidance with my experiences with nature, the more than human world. And those things are so related and intersect. And so as a young person, I definitely had just a lot of questions of particularly with race issues, that why were adults so kind of cruel, or what was wrong with the world as I was witnessing so much social stratification and suffering. And as I started exploring that more and in studies, and I just really started to link that with a lot of ecological issues, particularly with my educational pathways and kind of the surroundings that I found myself in. And that's a whole, bigger story. In terms of the book, and I'll hold up, I have an advanced copy from my publisher. It's not the full piece, but it's cool just to actually see the cover or the, yeah. And so it's called Returning the Self to Nature, Undoing Our Collective Narcissism and Healing Our Planet. And I had a personal encounter with someone who could probably be labeled as a narcissist, although really, and I know you know this as a licensed clinical psychologist, that only someone of that caliber and that background could actually diagnose who is a narcissist. And even with that level of training, it's a really hard condition to diagnose. But I found myself, unjarred by my experience, but also really perplexed and curious, because within the larger landscape of our society at that time, and definitely in present, narcissism is such a buzzword. And I found that the kind of mainstream information and also the research was fascinating and also really sad, because it's classified as such a personal affliction, and that if you have an encounter with a narcissist, the best thing to do is to just cut them out of your life. And I definitely come from both professional and also spiritual background, where if one person's suffering, it's actually a reflection of our larger community. And I recalled in a lot of the early ecopsychology literature, particularly with the work of Gomes and Kanner, Mary Kanner, and Alan Kanner and Mary Gomes, as well as others, and Christopher Lasch. There was a little bit around narcissism and linking it to our high levels of consumerism. And I started really connecting those links between the narcissism that we're seeing in our current society as a social pathology, and how it was really a collective endeavor.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I really appreciated in your book is how nuanced you really get about narcissism, that there's so many flavors, whether or not they're, all named in something like the DSM, but you talk about healthy versions that we all have, and covert versions, and really extreme malignant versions, and then moving into this collective area. Can you maybe shine even a little more light on some of those different aspects, types of narcissism?
Oh, sure. And yeah, hopefully what I say will make sense even to me. But yeah, I mean, and it is fascinating. I spent so much time researching just the condition of narcissism, and there is so much both kind of in pop culture and then more academic scholarship, and not all of it aligns. And I think it's going to be an area that we just keep surfacing, and it's going to look very different in terms of diagnosis and treatment and all of the literature in the future. But well, and to start with, healthy narcissism, because people use the word narcissism and it's immediately thought of as a bad thing. And there's particularly, I think, there's Craig Malkin does work in terms of looking at the narcissistic spectrum, where if it was a scale of 1 to 10, really we want to be kind of in the 4 to 6 range. So everyone should have a healthy sense of ego, really showing up, having self-love, being able to express themselves, and feeling their unique identity. And then we obviously don't want to be on the very low scale with little to no self-esteem, but we don't want to be at the extreme level. And at the extreme level is where you would find the category of narcissistic personality disorder, which is also usually called NPD. And that's where you have kind of a whole categories of different narcissists. And it is one of several cluster B disorders, but NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, is the only one that, from my understanding, isn't genetic. And we may find more about that in the future. And there are some people that say it does have a biological component, but in general, it surfaces from basically early childhood and faulty caregiving by primary caregivers, and a child not developing a healthy sense of esteem. And so within those NPD category, there's a slew of different kind of characteristics, types of narcissism from, there's so many. There's like a malignant, there's more of an covert or introverted narcissist. One of the ones that I find kind of interesting is there's a communal narcissist, and that's actually someone who could be like a do-gooder, really service-oriented, but it's just doing that because it, they feel good about themselves, and that's, I think, a very small percent of the narcissists. So there's all sorts of categories with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've spoken to it a little bit already, but I think it's really worth going into more deeply, that even though narcissism can be extremely damaging to other people, and we'll talk more about the environment, you also have this kind of compassionate lens, like you said, the advice is just to cut people off, and yet you're recognizing that it's emerging from a place of pain, and that just to cut that off isn't really a healing response, or kind of what it takes to shift things in the direction they need to go, especially because of this larger collective component. So maybe can you, I don't know, say more about that? On the one hand, what's a healthy boundary, right? Because we need that around, certain people, and yet not to banish.
Yeah. Gosh, and there's so much right in that question. So you might have to jostle me if I forget a part of it, because so much comes up for me in my I guess back to my own experience with a narcissist, or someone who could be labeled as a narcissist. One of the saddest parts I found was that I realized that people in my community knew about kind of the dangers of this person, and there was narcissists can be really damaging to not only one's self-esteem, sometimes even one's safety, kind of they can alienate you from loved ones, so many different, and we'll talk about, I think, probably some of the traits of someone with narcissistic personality disorder. And so what happens if you look at a lot of the literature, people will talk about the victims of a narcissist. And what happens is a narcissist will actually cycle through different people, almost like satiating their need, and then they'll toss a person away. And sometimes they'll come back and try to pick that up. And so it can be a cycle of damage. And often someone say you should definitely break ties with that person. But when that happens, they're also going to be then looking for their next kind of source of feeding. And so there was a sadness that if I cut off from a narcissist, it's actually, now I'm kind of, it's almost like a gnat in my backyard situation. I'm putting it onto someone else is now going to have to deal with this person. And I think about how many people in the in our US society, but worldwide, this is happening. And that seemed really maddening. And then in the more compassionate framework, which is what I'm really more care about, is that it is someone who has narcissistic personality or extreme narcissism is someone who has had a lot of trauma and damage, particularly as a child. And so to really demonize this person isn't recognizing that they have these really deep wounds that need to be attended to. And maybe it's not a one-on-one attending, but we have to look at our larger society that a lot of the research says that we're having increasing numbers of narcissists. And so that means we're having increasing numbers of damaged children. And I mean, we can link that to so many things. We're seeing young people with so much rage, so much suffering, so much pain that's being put out into the larger society, not just on themselves. So I remember the recently passed wisdom holder Maladome Some would talk about how if someone in a community is ill, it's not about that person, it's about the larger society. So instead of making this one person or all these separate narcissists, we need to look at what is this saying about our larger society, our communities.
Yeah, I want to pick up on a thread of something you said about, a classic narcissist sort of uses people. They're a form of food almost. I don't remember what word you used, but it's like food. And there's a real dehumanizing aspect to that. And that, I think, is a really good segue to the intersectionality around narcissism and the environment, narcissism and racism, narcissism and whiteness. And so do you want to begin to connect some of those dots?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. That's a lot right there. And and I've got yes, so, and I'll maybe just start with some basics. It's probably it's helpful just to know some of the traits of what someone who's a kind of classic narcissist, someone with narcissistic personality, and these are some just sweeping patterns, but this would be someone who's got this grandiose sense of self, comes off very arrogant, has very low empathy for others, like literally has trouble reading the emotional levels, cues from others, and even when they may come across, they're not really that concerned on what's going on with others. It's kind of like all of us probably have that family member or a friend who maybe you see them or you talk on the phone, and they don't ask you at all about yourself, or if you bring up something about themselves, they redirect the conversation because it's not an interesting conversation unless it's about them. And then another trait is that just kind of the shamelessness, this feeling that they just can't do anything wrong. They're just kind of perfect. And if something is a problem, it needs to be about the other people and not them. And then there's kind of a kind of switch in terms of patterns, because there's also a key pattern is a fragile ego. And so this really deep rooted insecurity. Another trait is a hypersensitivity to critique. If you critique a narcissist, often they'll get really angry, even rage, get into bouts of rage, refute it. And then there's the last, general pattern is just this overall constant need to feel more special than others. And so not just special, we should all feel special, but more special than others. So this hierarchical category, and it's like every day is your birthday and you're the only person that can have a birthday. And so when we connect this to collective narcissism, it's really looking at that. And I'm very US centric, so I'm really speaking from what I witness and experience as a person living in the US. And this translates also more to a lot of Western and consumer-driven societies. We shift narcissism from the individual to our larger society, and really looking at the way that we're treating the earth with collective narcissism. We're in this society of self-centeredness. We have these traits of fierce individualism that has been part of the story of being, American, this constant vanity, consumerism, success-driven, that pull yourself up by your bootstraps, the ladder of success. Everyone can be a millionaire if you just work hard enough, which obviously is not true. But this hyper competitiveness, a constant need to feel special, more special than in this, like other countries, like we're number one. And so looking at that, and then as we were talking about with narcissistic personality disorder on the individual level, it happens when a person has in their early childhood primary caregivers that are not really doing their jobs. They're not giving supportive relationships to that child. And there's two faulty patterns that people talk about in terms of object relations theory. And one is when there's too much attention given to the child in a way that the child needs to be hyper vigilant to the adult's needs rather than their own. And so that's one pattern. And then there's another pattern where the adult doesn't give barely any attention to the child. And so the child is left needing attention, needing to be seen and not being. And so both of those patterns really result in a sense of, not a sense, an actual damaged trust within the young person, the child, the developing child. And so with having that damaged trust in the world, the child replaces their kind of reality and constructs like a bubble reality that makes them feel safe. And so They're really in this kind of false constructed reality. And so when I look at it at the collective level, instead of having the primary caregiver as a parent or some sort of relative, some sort of adult, in our society, our primary caregiver has really shifted authority to global corporate culture, where that's so much of our dominant worldview of, always having a successful bank account, all of this ever increasing GDP of the United States, of corporations now can classify as individuals. All of these things that we've really pledged our allegiance to, unbridled consumerism and commerce and capitalism in a really detrimental way. And so with that, instead of having these kind of community relationships, in the work I do with ecopsychology, we look so much about the damage that's happening to pretty much each and every one of us through our separation from nature, through those rites of passage of being connected to land, to communities. And now we've shifted and given that authority to this global corporate culture. And even if we don't believe that, we're constantly bombarded with messages from our ads on our cell phones, our iPads, wherever we go, there's all of these things that keep us hyper vigilant to this larger thing of like, do I look good enough? Do I have the right clothes? Do I have the right job? Do I have the right family members? The right, so many different things. Am I the right size? Do I have the right shoes? All of these things. And so we're so outward focused on these material and very superficial things that we are living in a way that we're so hyper vigilant to these other things that we've forsaken the most precious and also most important responsibilities that we have. And so living in the society where we need like the best, the highest, the most, we're constantly in this kind of hierarchical and competitive nature, and we become overly prideful and arrogant, and it cycles and cycles. And so we end up living in this kind of false reality where we're so hyper focused on the what other people think of us, or this image that we're, a constant selfie of who we think we're presenting to the world, that we have such little time to think about our fellow humans, and in particularly about the earth and all living beings. We've really dropped the ball on our responsibilities to the larger world. And I would really like to, I know I can keep going on, but one thing that, there's so many different things, but I was so excited to have this opportunity to connect with you, Leslie, when you first reached out to me about doing some teaching in your climate psychology certificate that's starting this fall. We didn't know each other, but you didn't know that I had read your book, Emotional Resiliency in the Era of Climate Change, some years ago. And one of the communities that you spotlight, Jamestown, Colorado, is right near where I live. And I was deeply affected by the flood. And I've used some of your work in my ecopsychology classes for a year. So it's like, oh, I'm so excited. So I wonder if I could ask you a question.
Yeah, I'd be delighted.
Okay. And so, well, in the book that I mentioned, the Emotional Resiliency in the era of climate change. You've really done all of this work studying different communities that have experienced climate change disasters, including the one I mentioned near my community. And you use this term emotional resiliency. And I wonder what this means. Well, I know a little bit, but if you could share what it means and what you've been learning from these communities.
Sure. Well, emotional resiliency is getting a new definition in the face of climate change, because the conventional meaning, and what you'd still find most often if you look it up on the internet, is the ability to bounce back from a stressful life event like the floods or fires or any number of things, and how quickly can we get back to our baseline. But with climate change, there's no baseline in the sense that we're on this moving trajectory, right? The ground is shifting under our feet. There's going to be more difficulties that we all need to face and learn how to be with as we do our part toward creating a more just, safe world. So I'm saying now that emotional resiliency is cultivating the capacity to be empathetic, clear-minded, and present in the face of growing distress. Because, it's part of how our nervous system is built, that when stress is high, it actually kicks us out of our reasoning mind. We can't modulate the same way. We get really reactive, or we drop out and dissociate and want to numb out and check out. And until we learn these, more tools, more ways to regulate and remain present with each other's suffering, with each other's pain, and that kind of goes back to what you were saying about narcissism too, is there's this tendency to cut things out. But what does it require of us to be a little more open-minded, a little more open-hearted, a little more grounded, and take on the task of this stretch zone.
Yeah, I love your work, and these intersections. I mean, what you're talking about is so essential, just to keep naming, and that's something that comes up a lot in ecopsychology, is that with so many of these traumas in the past, it's been such a personal thing, and it was a trauma. Hopefully it ended, and now we're doing the healing. But in this era of climate change, and I think both of us, when we're talking about climate change, it's what's happening to the earth, but it's also all of these collective injustices and traumas. And even we can talk about bring in the role of the pandemic into that, and these wars that are going on, that there's no it started and ended. It's still happening, and we don't know, probably in our lifetimes, it's not going to end. But this emotional resiliency that you're talking about, it is a community, these resourcing, but it requires so much of being able to stay with our emotions, and also having so many means of resources and support and connecting with one another.
And it ties in so well to what you were talking about, of this split with narcissism between losing touch with a more authentic self, which is by its nature, connected to everyone, to everything, versus the scrolled self, which is kind of instead of looking out or connecting out, it's like this mirror that bounces back at the person, right? There's this feedback. So it even blinds us to sort of behold who we're with, or where we are.
Yeah, that's definitely a central factor within narcissism is this false self, and it's got so many different kind of um, nuances depending on whether it's being spoken about within clinical psychology or ecopsychology, or but so much of it is what you're talking about is this creation of almost like a plastic self where everything's always okay, but there's this constant numbness because it's a protective shell. And a lot of kind of Buddhist traditions, we talk about cocoon, this kind of staying in this safe space and not being able to peer out because it's just too painful. And while probably most of us don't, may not be able to see how we have false selves, we can kind of start unraveling that a bit. And, so many people like can't handle like the news or listening to viewpoints that are different than their own, or feeling their emotions, or being in one's body, or even within the eco-psychology and climate psychology worlds, like being in nature, getting, dirty, being porous, like so many experiences. And with a narcissist, it's so much about control, because if one lets that false self crumble, then the chaos might ensue. Yet it can be really joyful chaos, and a place where we suddenly start having all sorts of interactions and healing and new capacities. One of the antidotes to the false self is developing one's ecological self, which we all need to be doing. And probably most of us watching right now or in this space are doing. And that's when we really start developing affection and bonds to beings within nature. And so maybe it's a bird outside, or a special body of water, or being in a rain shower, just having those bonds and starting to step beyond our like small ego selves and kind of peering out and be like, oh, and then as we start peeling back kind of like the layers, we start developing our multicultural selves or more transpersonal selves. Like there's so many levels of self, and that's so much about the healing work that we need to be doing right now.
Yes, and part of the way I think of what you're describing is, our Western culture really identifies with being rational, in control decision makers, and that's such a small part, right? There's these unconscious things that bubble up. There's a different kind of knowing that happens when you're in your ecological self and connected with nature. And so much of what you've spoken about of community or communal wisdom, and even the self-regulation that happens, the way they're discovering our nervous systems sync up with each other. Very similar to the way that the root systems underground of a forest are spreading nutrients in this, invisible way.
Yes. Yeah. And we start to remember that, we're always interdependent, or Thich Nhat Hanh says interbeing, like no man, no woman, no being is an island on itself, or maybe we're an ecosystem. So we're always interacting, and our sense of self is connected and embedded in these other beings. I love when we get really philosophical and this idea like, well, there is no self. Because if you said, like, what part of me is just me? Like nothing, because I can't exist without air and water and warmth and so many yeah, we're living systems.
You know, you're
Ah,
sort of speaking to it already, but is there more you can say to, you know, kind of what it takes to turn things around? You know, you described this growing narcissism, and I think it is easy to see. And the way you described it playing out in our society
mm,
collectively and
yeah.
damaging the earth. And you know, what can we each do, and what do we need to do to engage the healing path?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. As you were saying that too, I realized when we were talking before, I never even got into like the connection between narcissism and racism, which I write about a lot in the book. And there's so much in terms of the kind of breakdown of all of the isms around collective narcissism and how they play out. But yeah, I do want to shift into some of the kind of healing around that because it's so important. Um, and yeah, and I think something in terms of healing is that uh, there's no one size fits all. Everyone's healing path is going to be different, and healing, I believe, is dynamic, it's collective, it's systemic. Um, uh, there's so many different pieces with that. And it's, yeah, there's no one size fits all. So within this, I have things that I offer, and I know I'll ask you about this after I talk because you have some wonderful offerings around this as well. Uh, and I think our work, there's so much overlap with these pieces around healing and tools and skillfulness. Definitely we've talked about the attending to our emotions, and there's so many, the work of Joanna Macy and Miriam Greenspan and Pema Chodron and so many folks, but just that importance of honoring what's actually surfacing for us instead of trying to either suppress it or just make it better. That the pathway, the pathway is through feeling our emotions. At the beginning of um, our conversation, we were talking about the kind of narcissistic scale or spectrum and the importance of actually having levels of narcissism. So another pattern there is just the importance of loving ourselves. So many people within our society, and probably all of us at certain points or even everyday moments, have these kind of negative thoughts about ourselves and these kind of constant critics and critiques. And we forget the importance of really having self-love, having gratitude and appreciation for our capacities, our goodness, our abilities to show up for so many different things. And it's so easy to lose that. So we want to honor our uniqueness and our specialness, but just not in a way that we think we're more special than others. Uh, Definitely the work with mindfulness is so important. I think having a meditation practice or, going out and walking in silence. There's so many different, doing yoga, just even mindfully, whether we're cleaning our houses or, doing service, just being mindful about it. And another one I talked about earlier was that developing our ecological selves. And of course, enlarging our compassion towards others. When we're so caught up in the me, or even the self-critique, it's a great practice to just turn out like, how can I be useful? How can I make someone else have a better day today? How can I be of service? And then the last piece that I think is so important is this idea of grace And that's the opening up to something greater than our really small sense of self. And it gets a little like, ooh, what are you talking about? I think probably folks that are in this space are probably more aligned with being spiritual beings, and whether it's religion or spiritual but not religion, but just being able to recognize that there's something much bigger than the human world. And also there's something bigger than just even the visible material world, and being able to drop into that and really having some guidance there. So I really would love to, before we, for you to talk a little bit about the components in your work that bring about the healing. And I know you do a lot about grief and all sorts of tools. So I would love for you to share that, because it's just so amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's, I think you were describing this earlier. As you speak, I have about, 10 things going off at once, because I think we're so aligned in this. Well, what you were just describing around, how to access wonder and joy as being core human capacities and human experiences. And we've got these complex emotions too, right? That come out of, like you said, early childhood wounding or experiences we encounter through our life. And so it's such a both and, right? To not do, and I appreciate the way you bring the emotions in, not to do a spiritual bypassing, that it's only okay, right? To feel certain things, and there's emotions we want to avoid. But that, especially in the face of climate change, there's so much now talk about eco-anxiety, eco-grief, rage, frustration, despair, dread. Not because there's anything wrong with us in feeling those things or those emotions are wrong, but because if we are empathetic and care and pay attention to the damage that's happening, that's how we respond, and we don't want to just feel under the weight of that all the time. We've talked about skillfulness too, but how to at least begin by honoring, that's us hearing the pain of the earth, the pain of people, the non-human world. I mean, the whole thing that's rippling through us, through those interconnectedness. And so to really be tender and validating toward these really difficult feelings. And that is part of, this larger picture that also includes this essential life force and joy, and that our joy doesn't have to be dependent on things getting solved, that it's also has its own sovereignty in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's,
So,
yeah, there's such what you're talking about, I think invokes so much tenderness too, when you're talking about eco-anxiety, and we can spread that to just like the general anxiety probably most of us are feeling right now. And sometimes it's like, there's no pinpoint of why. And so it's like, well, I've got, everything's working in my body, or, what's going on. And I think in kind of mainstream psychology, it's, well, and, what's your relationship with your father or your mother, or that it needs to be a personal thing, rather than now we're really waking up and realizing how bound up we are together and how interdependent. And so that kind of fine sensitivity that so many of us are aware of now. It's for me, it's just kind of beautiful that we're feeling like the anxiousness and the pain and the sadness, because it's so deeply rooted in love and caring. And when we can like actually name that and see that and start engaging with one another, it actually turns into something really beautiful and something that can be held, because we see that we're not alone. Oh, this isn't about some personal pathology. Like what's going on in the world is validly tragic and painful and alarming. And I'm awake and alert, and I'm ready to attend to this.
Yes, beautiful. Ugh. You know, maybe this is a good segue to, I know some questions have been coming in.
Yeah,
Does it feel like a good time to shift and see?
I think it's a perfect time. Yeah, and so I will let's see. Okay, yes, we've got some questions. So I'll read the first one. And thank you everyone who has the courage to bring a question. And I know not all of them will surface, but hopefully we'll have some responses to the questions too. So for this first one, with all the ecotherapeutic approaches, what do you both think are the most important aspects to have in an intervention to reconstruct the ecological self? Ah, yeah. Let's see here. Um, I'm happy to start and then maybe we can shift. Yeah. So I'll read that again. With all the ecotherapeutic approaches, what do you both think are the most important aspects to have in an intervention to reconstruct the ecological self? And I would say a sense of curiosity and I guess just a willingness to engage. And when I teach face-to-face undergraduate students in ecopsychology, I often get that song from a very decolonized Broadway production, but colonized Broadway, but The King and I, really, but there's a song, Getting to Know You, uh, getting to know all about you. And I think about it as we're in nature and kind of being curious, and you're kind of meeting a new possible friend and like being like so excited and not having projections of what this experience is going to be, because you just might just get bitten by some mosquitoes and get a sunburn, but to just like be like ready for whatever, and to have curiosity.
That's beautiful. I think I would just tag on to that a little bit. You know, we've talked a lot about one of the core wounds is this sense of separation from all of life and from each other. And so to use that like a little bit of a compass with that curiosity, like, well, how am I connected? What ways? And like an inquiry. And, discovery, even things of how like the rhythm of our breath with this ebb and flow is like the same rhythm we see in the rising and setting of the sun and in the waxing and waning of the moon, and all these things that are, we are part of this same rhythm.
Yeah, it's tides of the ocean. Yeah. Yeah, that was a great starting question. Do you want me to keep reading them, or do you want to read the next one? You got it. Yeah.
Let's see. In ecotherapy settings, I've often heard of foundational attachment, but failed to find literature on it theoretically. What do you think of an attachment lens for repairing the ecological self?
Do you want to, because I think you probably have a stronger background in And maybe you could explain to the larger audience what foundational attachment is. And I don't know, yeah, if we're
Yeah,
thinking about in terms of,
I-
yes.
I'm not sure if I'll get to quite what this person was asking because it's very specific, but it matters to have a sense of belonging, and belonging to place is one of these. What's that word? Oh, a lot of people are hearing this word now, solastalgia, which is
Yeah.
this feeling of being homesick or longing for home when you haven't gone anywhere, but the environment around you has shifted so much due to climate change. And then it tugs on that kind of attachment to place. It can be disorienting, it can be painful, it can be unsettling. So, and with young kids and supporting them to grow up to be stewards, to help them fall in love the way they're naturally inclined to do with how plants grow and from a seed and the rain and the sun, and it is that kind of being in there, and again, part of it that I think is an element of this attachment.
Definitely. Yeah. And I would probably continue along that, I won't say lines, those circles, in terms of when we were talking about kind of the primary caregiver and like the parents, which are often like our, I guess, foundational attachments. When we shift it to the ecological self, and within kind of these areas, we have the metaphor and literal for of Earth as mother. People say Mother Earth, and if we can actually start recognizing that nature's always all around us, no matter where we are, nature is there, and if we can actually start um, um, recognizing nature as Mother Earth, as a wisdom holder, as a holder. We're literally carried on the body of Earth all of our lives. We actually start having this appreciation. Instead of visualizing ourselves standing on Earth, we're actually within Earth, and we're actually animals. As part of ecosystems, and just like the bonding there, that we have a greater mother, even if we feel disconnected from other people. Yeah, that's another great question. Let's see. Okay, and here's one. Is returning the self to nature a developmental human arc, reparation of a split, or both? Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I'll read it again. So I guess the book, Returning the Self to Nature, is this a developmental human arc, a reparation of a split, or both? And I would say it's neither, it's both. It's, I think, a myriad of different things. The kind of the book itself is really kind of painting the issues, unpacking it, unraveling it, and then really turning to how do we reconnect? How do we return the self to nature? And I think the work that Leslie and I both do around the ecological crisis has those elements of being able to unpack and recognize, but then how do we actually build skillfulness? And it's, I don't think it's a kind of package like, first you do this, then you do this. And if you sign up for this, you'll, have all the answers. I don't think it's a canned piece, but it's also connecting with this larger story that we're living, and how do we connect with our communities, both in our bioregions, but also across kind of global spheres of what's happening with climate change, and really start building this resiliency. And so, yeah, and I definitely think the reparation aspect is huge in terms of restoring our sacred relationships with Earth, including with one another, mending our split. Yeah. I don't know, Leslie, what would you say about that?
Yeah, today we've talked a lot about layers. Before I was talking about emotions are a layer of us, and then there's this like pure spirit or joy. And this question to me kind of, I think of layers too, like the self in nature, to me, it requires both ancient and new eyes, right? Because of a split, but it's not like we're creating something, right? It's like already inherent, it's already in us. And this thing happened that does go through an arc of time, where this split has occurred. And now we are looking at how to heal this and what needs to happen. And it gets named, we're talking about entering the Anthropocene era and all of that. So in the arc of time, it follows kind of the developmental reparation arc. But underneath that, it's this already present, always has been, is actually present now, other layer that we are trying to, reconnect the dots.
Yeah. And it's the whole just coming home again, kind of to our kind of ancestral DNA of being earth-based peoples and remembering that. Yeah.
Okay, let's see, I'll read the next one. In addition to your books and research, do you have any recommendations on other articles, books, or sources on the nature-culture duality and human exceptionalism, narcissism, and individuality?
Yeah, I could start, and that's a great question. And well, yeah, I'm definitely nerd out on all of these things. My students, no matter what level I'm teaching, they're like, "Oh, is she going to bring up that book again?" But one of my favorite books is it's by Chellis Glendinning, and it's called My Name is Chellis, and I'm in recovery from Western civilization. And it's been around for quite a while, but it's just, I think, spot on in so many of these issues, unpacking. Gosh, there are so many. Maybe in terms of narcissism, there are some, and in my book, there's a list of sources for further reading, some of like the top ones I would recommend. There's so many things on narcissism. One of my favorite scholars on narcissism has actually done talks for the public programs at CIIS, and I'm gonna slaughter her name, Dr. Ramana Darbasi. She has a book, and I think it's called like, "Do You Know Who I Am?" Is the title, and it's all about narcissism. The book that I mentioned by Craig Malkin, Malkin. Let's see. And it says, in addition to your books, but I highly recommend Leslie Davenport's work, especially the emotional resiliency in the era of climate change. Gosh, there's so much in terms of ecopsychology. There's so many different books. There's a book, Radical Ecopsychology, by one of my colleagues, Andy Fisher. There's so many different books. Yeah, Leslie, do you want to name some? Because I could spend so much
Yeah,
time on.
that's fine. I honestly am not sure if I have any to add right now. And partly because they, kind of like you were doing, it will take a while for the name to come to the forefront of my brain. So
Yeah.
I don't have any to add right now.
Okay. Yeah. Then yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. And so our next question, as we as we careen from one immediate feeling crises to another, how do we acknowledge what is painfully around us while also finding ways to reconnect to the self and to nature? That's such a beautiful question. And so, yeah, we're to restate it, with all of these crises that we're in, and there's so many and they're interlocking, but there's so many, it's so much to hold. How do we acknowledge what is painfully around us while also finding ways to reconnect to the self and to nature? And yeah, I think we had talked, Leslie and I were talking about potential dialogue topics. And one piece in the early part of the book, I named the term tragic optimism, that was coined by Viktor Frankl, who was a very famous Holocaust survivor and also a humanist psychologist, if I'm correct, and really looking at how even when the most horrifying things are happening, it's so important to be able to hold both the pain and the kind of meaning within what's happening. So there is a potential for kind of the wisdom and possibility to emerge there. And so I think so much about the similar to anyone who's in recovery from any sort of addiction, the recovery movement talks about kind of rock bottom. And when we can actually admit that there's something happening, a problem, and we can feel those really heavy emotions and stay with that pain, we're also mirroring that capacity to stay with also deep joy. And so I always remember having a really sad thing going on in my life. I think I had gone through a really bad breakup or something, and I was out on my outside of where I live on the deck, just sobbing and feeling so sad. And then a bird came by and it was singing and it was so beautiful. And I remember in the tears just being like, oh, yeah, it's so beautiful. And just to be able to, I think, tap into those very ordinary experiences that spark the extraordinary in as many moments of each day as possible. And so living in that kind of space where we can be mindful of the beauty, oh my gosh, I woke up this morning and as Leslie was talking, I can breathe, and as I'm breathing in, something is breathing me, and just these interconnections and the people and the spaces in our world that bring so much kind of curiosity, joy, even the sadness, and to be able to relish in that and not to forget about all of those, as we're also being able to stay with kind of there's so much horror and pain, and we don't have to stay in it 24/7. Remembering laughter is available, beauty is available. I know Leslie has more to say about this, but I could go on this topic forever. Such a great question.
I'll add just a little bit, which is sometimes I think we need to examine if we have certain internal habits or narratives that prevent us from experiencing something. Like,
Mm.
and it's not always conscious, but, if you attend, you can notice what's happening. Like maybe I shouldn't feel good when there's so much terrible things happening in the world. I shouldn't
Mm.
enjoy myself, or I don't deserve to, or
Mm.
vice versa. Kind of, we talked about almost a toxic positivity, and it's hard to be with the harder spots. And so to get to know kind of where you may set up camp or get a little bit stuck, because feelings and emotions flow, feelings and emotions coexist, if we make enough room for them. And like you were saying, some examples are everyday examples. I can think of when my son went off to college and kind of left home, how painful that
Mm.
was for me, and how joyful I felt for him setting out to create his life. And they were both big feelings. And there's, I think, plenty of examples where, more than one thing is available at the same time.
Mm. Oh. Oof.
Okay, let's see, maybe I can go to the next question. Do you see a connection between cancel culture and collective narcissism?
Oof. Yeah. Yeah. That's an intense question. Um, yeah, I mean, I can definitely say something about, did you want to start with
No,
that, or should I go? Yeah. Yeah. Because, and I think there are different kind of definitions and framing of what cancel culture is. And so I would maybe, when it's call out culture to such an extent that it's invoking a lot of kind of fear and pain, where maybe someone gets, there's so many levels, because there's kind of the such importance within our interlocking social justice movements of actually naming that, hey, this is not okay, and this cannot continue anymore, to kind of over pursuing like a particular individual and calling them out to such a kind of public shaming, almost like a stoning of someone, and a kind of metaphorical that can be just as painful. And so I think there is, and you brought up core wounding before. I think I read something, it's probably like a Facebook meme that someone posted that rings so true, that hurt people hurt people, that saying. And so when we're living in a society where basically all of us are traumatized, and whether it's because we're living under corporate globalization, or whether they're the smaller yet so prevalent traumas underneath these systems, we have so much hurt and unresolved, attending to that hurt, or having that hurt be seen and recognized by the larger whole, can actually create kind of a deep need to really call that out in ways that can be really painful on a collective level. And so I do see the connection between that, of needing sometimes to make one's issue, one's kind of single issue, the issue, and to like fixate it, and it's the most important issue. And I think so many of us are realizing that, well, first of all, that we need to hold these various issues together, so we have this kind of solidarity, this movement of movements to heal things. And then also that there's so many wounded people in our society that can also be the folks kind of in power the people that we may see as the oppressors are also deep down oppressed, because everyone, whether it's a system of white supremacy or a system of global corporatism, everyone is suffering, even though one may appear to be higher on this like chain of this ladder. And so in order to heal, we actually need everyone, or the majority of everyone. And so by alienating and pushing people out of the community, we're doing exactly what we would do to that narcissist. If we just cut them off, they're going to go and perpetuate pain somewhere else. So that I could go on about this, and I hope that that's kind of rambling. What do you have thoughts on that?
Just, I think you're really getting to the point really well, and I agree that if for all of our unprocessed, or maybe not even fully conscious pain, we do tend to project it onto others, and there is kind of this nuanced finesse between saying what needs to be said and even creating discomfort compared to something that has a more attacking essence to it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So like a difference. Yeah.
and it's hard to sort out, when you were talking, I was kind of feeling this overall sense of like, life is hard. Being a human is hard. Figuring this all out is hard, and we're going to fumble, and we're going to, not do it gracefully all the time. And so it's just another occasion as we try and say and do what needs to be done to try and bring compassion to it too.
Yeah. So to disrupt, but not obsessively attack. Yeah. And the compassion. Yeah. And to be able to witness the woundedness in everyone.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we've got a couple. Oh, all right. So the next one, I'm like, oh boy, this is a huge question. But could you speak more to the connection between collective narcissism and white supremacy? And that's a huge one. And I definitely write a lot about it. And I think it's a big topic. And I think when we mirror the kind of Western paradigm and the kind of traits of needing to be like number one and overly linear, and that sense of competitiveness, and this kind of sorting out of different peoples. And when I feel like I'm not being articulate now, but basically when we look at kind of the intersections between ecological issues and social justice issues, and we recognize that the system of corporate globalization goes hand in hand with systems of white supremacy, because in order to have economic domination, we're constantly looking at both the land and also as people as resources to squeeze out economic profit. And white supremacy has been used as and this is such a base way of narrating it because it's so complex, but really sorting out certain types of people into this ladder of haves and haves not, because it's an easy way to do that. And at the kind of start of US society, there was a point where there were things like Bacon's Rebellion going on in other places where there was a possibility for solidarity between working class whites, First Nation peoples, both freed and enslaved Black peoples, having this like coalition, but by presenting whiteness, the owning class saw that they were going to be the majority and could overthrow this system. And so by offering whiteness to people that could become white, with this kind of packages of you can now own land, you no longer have to be an indentured service, you can vote, you can marry, and then all these other people are losing any of those privileges. It's a way of exceptionalism, like, oh, I'm unique and more special, I can be number one, I can. So it's this kind of fixation, and there's so much about it, and equating skin color to superiority. And so, yeah, there's just so much to it, but that's such an important question. And I hope folks do read the book, because I really get into that in one of the chapters.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I'll just add, it's kind of obvious, but it's so baked into the systems now, right? This racism and what you were describing, you know, it doesn't matter what system we look at, medical, housing, food production and distribution, education. So it's, there's no place where it's not connected, I guess is really what I mean.
Okay, so looks like we've got one final question.
What a good one to end on.
Yeah. So do you want to, yeah. Okay, so the question is, what is bringing you joy right now? So I mean, right now, this is bringing me joy, actually having this conversation with Leslie. And although I can't see and interact with who's here, like, this is bringing me joy. And then the most, I think, joyous thing right now is garden season. So I doubled down on having 2 gardens this year, and they're all planted out, and things are sprouted. Right before we started our dialogue, I harvested my first batch of arugula. So I get so geeked out on garden season and gardening. And so that's bringing me so much joy. And then also just being, connected, knowing that there's so many folks that are awake and attending to what's happening in the world. And this is not you're not alone at all. What about you, Leslie? What's bringing you joy right now?
Very, very similar to what you said. I truly feel and focus a lot on what feels like this growing up community and this, swelling up of people interested, awake, involved, wanting to do more, wanting to understand in a really deep way. Like what, kind of like we're talking about today, what are the underpinnings of all this? And it's just so uplifting to find all the places where this is coming into the fore, into focus. And I guess I'll just also add, I've got 2 very wild little tornado grandchildren. That are just, right in the joys of life and the craziness and the sweetness. And I get to spend a lot of time with them. And they, I get a lot of joy there.
Oh, that's, a lot of joy. Yeah, a lot of joy. Oh, gosh. Well, I just want to express my gratitude to be in conversation and just connection and community with you. It's definitely bringing me a lot of joy, and I just, I feel, I just feel so deeply honored, and obviously honored with our larger circles and community. And I'm really looking forward to deepening our connection this fall with being part of your climate psychology certificate, and then also yeah, attending to just the greater work and joy. Yeah.
Thank you. And I feel exactly the same way. So grateful for this conversation tonight, and that we do have these ways of working together coming up as well with the certificate program. And thanks to
Yeah.
all of you who've also participated and listened in and brought your questions. So to close, we're going to bring it back to Alex, who's going to say good night.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you'll join us for more of our upcoming talks and workshops. This conversation was recorded, so if you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community, it will be available on our YouTube channel at this same link and later on our Facebook page. We're also going to feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at CIISpod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your night.